Story 1: The Truck That Followed. David had been a truck driver for nearly 15 years. He had driven across endless highways, through stormy nights and lonely backroads, and had seen his fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing had ever unsettled him like the events of that night. It was a long-haul job, delivering cargo across a remote stretch of highway that cut through thick forest and rolling hills. The road was poorly maintained, cracked in places, with barely any street lights. It was the kind of highway that felt like it had been forgotten by time. The clock on his dashboard read 1:47 a.m. Outside, the sky was pitch black, with no stars or moonlight. His headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, the glow barely reaching the dense trees lining both sides. Then, in his side mirror, he noticed something. A pair of headlights in the distance. Another truck. At first, he thought nothing of it. Truckers often traveled late at night to avoid traffic. But as the minutes passed, something strange happened. The truck behind him never got closer, and never fell behind. It stayed exactly the same distance away, almost as if it was matching his speed perfectly. David frowned. That was odd. Usually, if another trucker was on the same route, they'd either overtake or eventually disappear behind. But this one? It was like a shadow, lingering just beyond his reach. Curious, David slowed down slightly. The truck behind him slowed down, too. A cold chill ran down his spine. He pressed the gas pedal, speeding up. The truck sped up, too. Now, David was fully alert, his hands tightening on the wheel. He flicked his high beams on, hoping to get a better look at the vehicle behind him. But when he looked in his mirror, there was no truck. Only the headlights. He couldn't see its cabin, or the grille, or even the outline of a driver. Just two bright white lights, floating in the darkness. David's pulse quickened. He had driven long enough to know that this was not normal. Still, he tried to shake it off. Maybe the truck had a black exterior, making it hard to see. Maybe the driver was playing some kind of stupid game. He decided to stop at a rest area ahead. If this driver was real, he'd pass by, and David could confirm he wasn't imagining things. A few minutes later, he spotted the pull-off, a small lot with a vending machine and an old streetlight flickering weakly. He pulled in and parked. Then, he waited. And waited. The truck behind him never appeared. The road remained empty, stretching endlessly in both directions. David's heart pounded. Where had it gone? There were no turns, no exits, just miles and miles of road. It was impossible for it to disappear like that. He rubbed his eyes, breathing deeply. Maybe he was overtired. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. After a few minutes, he shook off the unease, started his engine, and pulled back onto the highway. That's when he saw them again. The headlights. Right behind him. David's hands turned ice cold. This was impossible. There had been no sign of the truck before he got back on the road. No sound of an engine, no glow of headlights appearing from a distance. It was just there. Right where it had been before. Something was very, very wrong. He tried to ignore the rising panic in his chest and focused on driving. But then, things got worse. The headlights started flickering. Not in a random, broken way, it was a pattern. A rhythm. Like it was trying to communicate. David swallowed hard. He didn't understand the message, but his gut told him one thing: this wasn't another trucker. The radio in his truck suddenly crackled to life, static hissing through the speakers. Then, through the static, he heard something. A voice. A whisper. "Help me, please." David's blood ran cold. He glanced at the empty passenger seat, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. He was alone. He turned the radio off. The static continued. The voice, now weaker. "Don't stop, keep driving." David's breath hitched. He didn't dare look in his mirrors again. He just focused on the road, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Minutes passed. Then an hour. He kept going, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sky lightened with the first traces of dawn. The headlights behind him disappeared. By the time he reached a gas station, he was exhausted. He parked, rubbing his face with shaking hands. A fellow trucker walked past and gave him a nod. "Long night?" the man asked. David let out a breath. "Yeah. You could say that." The trucker chuckled, but then his expression changed when he saw David's truck. "Hey, buddy," he said slowly. "Your trailer." David frowned and stepped out to look. His stomach dropped. On the dusty back door of his truck, someone had dragged their fingers across the grime, leaving behind 5 long, deep streaks. Like someone had been clinging to it. And below the marks, a single word was etched into the dirt. "Help." David's head snapped up. He turned to look at the gas station lot, at the highway, at the rising sun. The road was empty. And then, from the radio inside his truck, he heard it one last time. "You didn't stop." The whisper was closer now. Right behind him. Story 2, The Highway That Never Ends. Logan had been driving trucks for nearly a decade, but Route 97 was a road he had always avoided. There were rumors about it. Truckers whispered stories about disappearances, strange figures, and the worst of all, the ones who made it out alive but swore they never found the exit. It was an old highway stretching through a desolate stretch of land, winding through miles of forest, abandoned gas stations, and cracked asphalt. Many truckers claimed their GPS would malfunction, or that they would drive for hours without reaching the next town, as if the road was looping endlessly. Logan had never believed in those tales. Until that night. It was past midnight when Logan found himself on Route 97. He hadn't meant to take this road, but after his GPS started acting up, rerouting him, and his usual route was blocked due to construction, he had no choice. "Just a road," he muttered to himself, gripping the wheel of his 18-wheeler. Just another damn road. The highway stretched before him, empty and silent. His high beams cut through the darkness, revealing faded yellow lines and towering trees on either side. The eerie thing was, it felt like he was the only one here. No other cars. No signs of life. Just miles and miles of road. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:12 a.m. Then, 1:12 a.m. again. His brows furrowed. That couldn't be right. He checked his phone. No signal. The screen flickered, then shut off. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. About an hour in, Logan spotted something ahead. A figure standing by the roadside. As he got closer, he saw it was a man in a dark jacket, his face obscured by shadows. He stood completely still, hands in his pockets, staring at Logan's truck as it approached. Logan instinctively tapped the horn, expecting the man to step back. He didn't. He just stood there. Logan swerved slightly to the left to avoid him, but at the last second, the man moved. Right into the road. Logan slammed the brakes. The truck's tires screeched, the cargo rattled, and his heart pounded against his ribs. But when the truck finally stopped, the man was gone. Logan's breath came in short gasps. He looked in the mirrors. Checked the roadside. Opened the door and peered into the darkness. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of a body. No movement in the trees. Just the empty highway. He climbed back into the truck, locking the doors. His pulse was still racing as he hit the gas and drove on. An hour passed. Then another. Logan kept driving, but something felt off. He had been watching for the next mile marker, but he hadn't seen one in ages. The gas stations and road signs were the same ones he had passed earlier. He was looping. His hands tightened on the wheel. No way. He had been driving straight. No turns. No exits. How could he be back at the same place? The radio crackled. Then, a voice, faint but clear. "You're not supposed to be here." Logan's breath hitched. The voice was inside his cab. Slowly, he turned his head to the passenger seat. Someone was sitting there. A man in a dark jacket. The same man from the road. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and hollow, his lips cracked as if he hadn't spoken in years. The truck swerved violently as Logan yanked the wheel in terror. The tire screeched, and for a moment, the world tilted. And then the figure was gone. Logan's breathing was ragged as he floored the gas, desperate to find an exit. But then, headlights appeared in his mirror. At first, he felt relief. Another trucker. Someone who could confirm he wasn't losing his mind. But as he looked closer, dread settled into his bones. The truck behind him had no driver. The cabin was completely dark, the wheel moving on its own. And then, more headlights appeared. 1. 2. A whole line of trucks. Moving in perfect synchronization, their engines humming in an eerie unison. Logan's hands trembled as he realized they weren't following him. They were leading him. Guiding him deeper into the road. His radio crackled again, the same voice whispering. "You need to turn around, before you become one of us." Logan didn't hesitate. He yanked the wheel, swerving the truck into the opposite lane. The moment he did, the convoy vanished. The road ahead was different. New. A green sign appeared. "Exit 1 mile." With shaking hands, Logan pressed the gas, speeding toward the exit. As his truck crossed over, he dared one last glance in the mirror. The convoy was back, but this time, parked at the edge of Route 97. Watching. Waiting. Logan didn't stop. He didn't look back again. He just drove. And he never, ever, took Route 97 again. The next day, Logan pulled into a diner and met an older trucker. When he told him about what happened, the man's face went pale. "You're lucky," he said. "Not many make it out." Logan frowned. "But, it was just a road." The old trucker shook his head. "It ain't a road," he muttered. "It's a trap. A loop. And the ones who don't get out." He leaned in closer, voice barely a whisper. "They become part of the convoy." Logan felt his chest tighten. As he walked back to his truck, he hesitated before checking his mirrors. For just a second, he thought he saw them again. The headlights. Waiting. And then, just like that, they were gone. Story 3, The Passenger in the Sleeper Cab. Ethan had been driving trucks for years, but if there was one rule he never broke, it was this. Never pick up hitchhikers. He had heard too many horror stories, people disappearing, truckers vanishing without a trace after picking up strangers. Some said it was thieves. Others whispered about something worse. But one night, on a deserted stretch of Interstate 22, he made a mistake. And he would regret it forever. It was just past 2 a.m. when Ethan first saw her. A woman in a tattered white dress, standing by the roadside. She was barefoot, her head tilted slightly, her hair falling over her face. He wouldn't have stopped, except for one detail. She was standing right next to an overturned car, its front end crushed against a tree, smoke curling from the hood. Ethan's gut twisted. An accident. For a brief moment, his common sense battled his conscience. He had never picked up a stranger before, but what if she was injured? Sighing, he slowed down and pulled over. The woman didn't move. Ethan rolled down the window slightly. "Hey. You okay?" She slowly turned her head. His stomach dropped. Her eyes were hollow. Empty. Like she had been staring at something too long, something beyond this world. She didn't answer. But she did something worse. She smiled. It was a small, unsettling smile, the kind that didn't belong on the face of someone who had just survived a crash. Ethan swallowed hard. Something about her felt wrong. But before he could pull away, she walked to the passenger side and opened the door. She climbed in. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Ethan's heart pounded. His instincts screamed at him to tell her to get out, to drive away, but his mouth was dry. His voice wouldn't come. Instead, he forced himself to breathe. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe that was why she was acting strange. He looked at her. She was staring straight ahead, not blinking. Where do you need to go?" he asked, gripping the wheel. Silence. Then, in a whisper, "I just need to rest." She turned her head slowly toward him. And Ethan saw it. Her neck was broken. Her head was tilted too far to the side, her skin pale as wax. Ethan's foot slammed on the gas. He drove fast, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't dare look at her again. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then he checked the passenger seat. She was gone. His stomach lurched. The door had never opened. The seatbelt was still buckled. And then, from the sleeper cab behind him, a faint creak. Like someone moving inside. Ethan's skin crawled. He wasn't alone. The sleeper cab was closed. He hadn't used it all night. He hadn't even checked it since he left the last truck stop. But now, something was in there. Something was breathing. Slow. Ragged. Then, a whisper. "I just needed to rest." Ethan's heart stopped. The curtain separating the sleeper cab from the driver's seat shifted slightly. He had 2 choices. 1. Keep driving and pretend he didn't hear it. 2. Look behind the curtain. His pulse thundered in his ears. Slowly, he reached for the curtain. His fingers brushed against the fabric. Something grabbed his wrist. Cold fingers. Thin. Too many. Ethan screamed, yanking his arm back as the truck swerved violently across the road. His breath came in short gasps, his vision tunneling. Then, the whisper again. "You should have never stopped." His vision blurred. And then everything went black. Ethan woke up in the driver's seat, his head slumped forward. Sunlight streamed through the windshield. For a moment, he thought it had been a dream. Then he saw the fingerprints. Long, dark streaks trailing from the passenger seat to the sleeper cab, as if something had dragged itself inside. Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't check the cab. He didn't want to know what was inside. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He drove. But no matter how far he went, he never felt alone in his truck again. And every night, when he parked at a rest stop and shut his eyes, he could still hear it. A whisper from the sleeper cab. "I just needed to rest."